Welcome back to the life of Tashmia. Today it's Girl Chat with Alex, the dom that trained me. I know you loved having her last season, and this season we're going to be making this a more of a regular episode. Today we're going to be talking about domination and why is it such a dirty word. Enjoy. So welcome back, Alex. I'm loving that we're going to have these little dom girl chats as our regular little episodes. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. And yourself?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking. So in today's app, I thought that we just have a little talk about dominance because it's something that I obviously do on a daily basis, but it's something that's coming up a lot about why do we get the concept of dominance so wrong? And I especially see, it's constantly portrayed as this very like dark, masculine, very like the energy of it, if you know what I mean. The energy to me is always very harsh. And it's just not the way at all that I relate to it or I practice. And I really think it's important to try and change this concept, especially among women, and trying to get women more into their dominant energy to understand that you don't need to practice dominance from a masculine.
Absolutely. I think you bring up a really interesting point because when people, especially go into the professional sense of being a dominatrix, they go straight into their masculine and they stay there.
Yeah.
And, a lot of that has to do with degrading other people, emasculating people, yelling at people. And that's not at all the empowerment of the woman, which dominatrix is all about, actually. Yeah. It's about the fact that women are so perfectly beautiful and powerful when they turn to their full feminine, which is actually a powerful place.
Yeah.
So it's got nothing to do. We, as a society, relate power to masculine, but that is so wrong.
Yeah. And we relate dominance to masculine. Like we think the concept of dominance is a masculine concept, but it's not. And I think that we've actually, well, most people misunderstand what dominance actually is. Dominance, as you said, is not belittling someone. Dominance is not demeaning someone. Dominance is actually, in my viewpoint, is leadership, facilitation, like guidance. I actually think dominance has so many negative connotations in the past, but I don't think that is actually where it needs to be. I actually think dominance is a positive word.
I think it needs to be retaught.
Yeah.
And this is why I think, especially in Australia, not this is my experience, and my experience is Australian, but definitely how we are brought up is that the man is powerful and the woman is submissive and the weaker.
Yeah.
And it's just such a wrong concept because if you ask me, childbirth, all the things that women do is the powerful. And we need to embrace the fullness of that power and not try and turn it into a masculine thing. And a lot of the submissive I've found, they're all about empowering women.
Yeah.
So if you turn totally to your masculine, that's actually not the dominant that they're seeking.
Yeah.
And so they will go trying to find this ultimate dominatrix who's fully into their feminine power. And it just doesn't exist professionally as often as it should. But I feel this is because it's being trained wrong also in the professional space. And so that needs to be reimagined and retaught. And that's what I'm a strong believer in, which I know you are as well, is how do we change this perspective so that the next younger generation coming through and wanting to pursue this as a profession will seek out the feminine and their own empowerment, and what that looks like doesn't have to look like what generations before us have done.
Exactly. And I think, maybe it's because we've gone through phases with BDSM where, for a long time, most of the dominants were men. And now I think we've stepped into this era where there's a lot more women who are like, I'm interested in dominance. I think that is running parallel with women becoming more independent, which runs again in parallel with our financial emancipation. What do you say? Our financial freedom. And as women get more financial freedom, they get more control over their sexuality or their sensual lives or their play lives. But we kind of seem to have got stuck in this point where we've gone from males being the majority of the dominance and then women now stepping into it, but the way they've stepped into it is by imitating male dominance instead of now where I think we should be is what is dominance for the feminine.
Yeah.
And that doesn't have to look like dominance for the masculine. We need to take it and make it our own. And I think we've done that with so many aspects of life, women stepping more into the workforce, women going to corporate. I come from a very masculine corporate background where the way to succeed was to be in your masculine. And now I think we've done the same thing in BDSM. We think, the way that a woman can step into the dominant role is, okay, well, I just play the man. And I just don't think it works.
No, I think hit the nail on the head with the work environment because any woman wanting to, you can't be emotional at work because that's a weakness. Women are emotional. That's how we're built.
Yeah.
So we should be embracing that and empowering that. But yeah, we're bringing that into every aspect of our life if we want to be taken seriously and we don't want to be considered less than. We're going, well, we need to be less emotional. We need to be more masculine in everything we do instead of going, well, this is who I am and this is why it's wonderful and this is why it's powerful because I'm going to do it differently.
Yeah.
And women leadership in the workplace is a prime example of something that we need to get right on that level even. And yes, what we're doing in empowering women to step more into their sexual empowerment and be a more dominant role in that and actually take full power back to be orgasmic and amazing and own their sexuality.
Yeah, exactly. And I think people don't realize that even just being dominant doesn't mean you have to get the, mean bossy role. Being dominant and taking the power back is literally can be knowing what you want, asking for what you want. Like, as I said, taking that leadership role in what that play scene is going to be. It doesn't have to be that extreme of whips and chains even. It's just literally empowering yourself to feel confident and capable to step into that power rather than being very passive. And I think in a lot of play encounters with women in the past, we have been very passive. We have been very like, okay, what does he want to do? And I'm just going to go along with it. You know what I mean? Like, how many times has that happened where you haven't stepped into that play space, like met as an equal? It's like, okay, I'm here just to kind of facilitate their good time.
Yeah. It's actually funny thinking about, some of the experiences I've had, not just as a dominant woman in the bedroom, but before I stepped into my full empowerment. And you literally were like, oh, he's getting that wrong, but I don't want to correct him.
Yeah.
And, oh, if he just did it this way, it would be better. Whereas now, even owning that in the bedroom and being able to speak up sexually, I think this is very important that we get all of these things right in our everyday life, let alone as a professional dominatrix.
Exactly. And as it's funny you said like, oh, well, he's not really doing that right, but I'm just going to sit here. I even think like the amount of times I would like fake orgasm just to get it to end. Because I'm like, okay, this is not working for me. I'll just like pretend I'm orgasming so then he can finish and then this will be over. Yeah, like,
too funny.
It's crazy. Like, and now it's just like, I would never fake it anymore because I now have the language to talk about it. And I think that's the first step that we need as a society is we don't talk about it. We're not taught how to talk about it. like at school, at home life, like we're not given the language to express our needs or our sexual desires. And I don't know how like that's going to change until like, you know, Instagram, social media, it's all censored. How do we actually teach a younger generation the language around what we want, asking for it, consent, boundaries? Like, we have just had to figure it out through our lifestyle and learn from other people or do research on our own or whatever. Like, my profession has taught me a lot, but that's been very much sought out. It didn't come to me. So I find it hard to think like, how is that going to change in the future?
I think it's important that more of these things happen, more of these conversations happen. But you're right. Like, I think pretty much everyone's first experience sexually kind of happens by accident.
Yeah.
You know, we're only teaching sex at school in a way of, you know, reproduction. It's not taught as pleasure. And as adults, this is such a big part of our life.
Yeah.
So we kind of accidentally find what we like.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, there's only a few options available that you're like, as a woman, you're like, oh, okay, well, you know, these are the positions that I know of. So I'm going to stick with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's a really interesting conversation. And unfortunately, I wish this would, you know, reach the masses and be talked about more freely on TV. We've got so many channels now to communicate, but it's still not getting through.
It's so censored. That's the thing. And it's interesting, like, you like the word pleasure. Like, we, like humans, we are driven to seek pleasure, yet we don't talk about it. Like in our sexual lives, like we're not given that opportunity to just to see like, what things am I interested in? What things can I try? And so many people don't find out till a much later point, and it's at a point where maybe they don't feel confident enough to bring it up to a partner, or they feel ashamed of it because they've never been given the right to pleasure.
No, well, you know, talking about my past, obviously, I was brought up in a cult.
Yeah.
Talked about that in one of your previous episodes. And so for me, it was like forbidden, right? And then I got married really young. And so for me, you know, it was literally branded into my brain from childhood that as a woman, you're the submissive and you just do as you're told. And so stepping into my empowerment only happened in my 30s.
Yeah.
And I was sexually active from 19. So it's like, okay.
Where did that decade go?
Yeah, exactly. And how many more decades do we need for, you know, young women or young men, anyone, to go through where they're not open to exploring all the joys that life and sex can bring?
Yeah.
You know, we're still holding our tongue.
Exactly.
We're censored everywhere you go. You know, what you can't even, I don't even think you can say the word sex on Instagram.
No, you got to write SEGGS.
Correct.
Otherwise,
what, like, how stupid is that?
Yeah, and kink, again, if you like tag something as kink, it's flagged. Like, it's ridiculous. But it's interesting, like, talking about the feminine aspect to dominance. And of course, like, I don't want to give, like, there is a place for that strong, dominant, very powerful woman, femdom, you know, and there's definitely place and there's definitely room for that. And I have so much respect for that and more. But it's funny because, one, that's not the dom I relate to being, but two, of the doms I train, I actually have yet trained that type of dom. Every dom that I have trained so far have wanted to come from the femme sensual erotic energy side of it, and that's always been what has prevented them from seeking it out, because there is still such a stigma related to dominance and dominatrix as that very hardcore, very, like, you know, what we would see in like porn. That's how it's still. So when someone's like, I do feel this dominant calling, I have a voice, because a lot of women, you know, we are doing the work. Like, women are so good at doing fucking self-work. I'm sorry, but like the amount of women that I know that are working hard, that are doing their self-work and they're stepping into their sexuality is amazing. And then they have this call to be, okay, I want to take a bit of that control in the bedroom. I want to be dominant. Some of these, and a few of these people are trained to be professional ones as well, but they just do not relate to at all this harsh, mean, strict, masculine dom. They want to keep their feminine energy. And to me, that's been such a, I love seeing that. For me, that's just really validated what I do and what I want to promote and how I want to educate dominance. But it's interesting that there's still that stigma out there that when someone thinks of a dominatrix, they think of mean hard bitch. It's just a fact. But on the other end of the scale, what I think is really interesting is men and how men view dominance, especially towards women. And again, we've had that traditional view of the very masculine, hardcore man and the very weak, submissive woman. And again, there is a place for that. But there's a lot of women who want to be dominated, but not in that way. Do you know what I mean? And they want to play with that power dynamics with a man. Obviously, we're talking very hetero in these scenarios, but it's very funny what hetero men think women want for dominance and what women actually want. It's so different.
Well, honestly, I'm with a submissive partner right now.
Yeah.
But the sexiest thing is his dominance when we go out for dinner and he knows a good wine. I'm so, he's ordering something that I have no idea about, but he's like, oh, that'll go well with this. And, confidently orders that. So dominance can also be just confidence and direction. It doesn't have to be putting another person, in a submissive role.
Yeah.
It can purely be, I'm confident, we're going to do this. And that's sexy to a woman. So I think we misunderstand dominance on so many levels. And to your point, when you're like, oh, it's all about the whips and the chains and the mean bitch. And for a guy, they think, oh, the woman wants to be smacked on the ass. And it's just not the case at all.
And we've talked about this, you don't need one single piece of equipment to practice BDSM. Power exchange is a mental thing. Power dynamics is an energy. You don't need all the tools. The tools are just a bonus, right? The tools are just let's have a bit of fun and add something to it. But you don't actually need a tool to participate in a power dynamic exchange. And that exchange doesn't have to be based in violence. It doesn't have to be based in degradation or humiliation. Of course, those aspects can come into it, but there's so much more breadth to what BDSM is. And I think sometimes that's what people are missing.
Yeah, the reliance on tools is a very interesting concept because the tool's fun, right? So you get a new tool and it's like, what is this going to do? And you get very, very excited about it. But that actually has nothing to do with dominance. So if you're talking about being dominant, it's about the power dynamic and about you walking in the room and controlling the room without even saying a word.
Yeah.
And some of my most powerful sessions I have had have been through no talk and no contact. And that's a very interesting concept because people are like, but how did they know what to do?
Yeah.
How do they know what you wanted? And sometimes it's a look, sometimes it's just a hand gesture.
Yeah.
But these things are very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And that's punishment. We talked about that and punishment. Yeah. And for me, one of my biggest things that I relied on for punishment was actually taking away rather than giving extra. Yeah. So, because they find enjoyment in perhaps being caned. So taking away things is actually sometimes more powerful.
Yeah, I'll never remember, I think you told me this years ago, is one of the best punishments is I'm not going to touch you for the rest of the session. And I'm like, that is such, that is ultimate. Like, because that's what like, not engaging with someone or ignoring them, like, how fucking powerful is that?
Yeah, and it's the hardest thing to do, actually, because it's one of those things where you're like, you get excited from the fact that you're not doing anything and they're still getting turned on and they're still reacting to what you're doing.
And they're wanting it.
And yeah, exactly. And it just brings a bigger smile onto your face because you're just like, yeah, I'm holding all the power right now. And that's by withdrawing as opposed to giving extra and more tools and more punishments. So yeah, I think there's a lot of power in taking away the tools. I think, honestly, I should say that if you're going to actually be a dominatrix, you should practice without the tools first.
Oh, yeah.
Like, don't introduce anything, because if you can't have the power without the tools, then you're doing something wrong.
Oh, and you're not going to have it with them. And even when I'm doing like my one-on-one coaching with trainees, like a majority of our sessions, our weekly sessions, is sitting there talking about the topic for the week. And then maybe at the end, some sessions we don't even touch the tool. Or it might just be at the end bit. And then I'm like, okay, we've been talking about, maybe it's been corporal punishment or impact play for that session. Most of it is talking about the power dynamic, the different ways you can use it, what the psychology is behind it. And then, okay, let's go and have a look at the tools. As I said, like, anyone can learn how to use a tool. And it is like, it's something that people need to learn how to do, because the last thing you want is people using tools and not knowing about it. And I think, like, my philosophy has always been confidence and capability. And that capability comes from learning the tools, but that confidence doesn't. And that's the bit that I think people sometimes miss. They think, okay, if I just learn what to do, then I can play with being dominant. It's like, no, you've got to get that confidence from that empowerment within you. And I think that's, like, as I said, that's the key point. And that's the point that I think you actually have to spend a lot of time on developing and looking within yourself to find.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do think, unfortunately, there's a lot of tools out there which are being misused. And so we really do need to still train on the tools. But to understand the concept of dominance does not require tools.
No.
So they're two completely separate things, and you need to get both concepts right, and you need to train on both concepts before you step into a dungeon and a session. Unfortunately, that's not happening.
No.
You can go to a dungeon in Sydney right now and not be not go into a session confidently knowing that your dominatrix has been trained correctly in tools. I'm sorry to say it. But they aren't trained. They're literally pretty. And, oh, here's how you crack a whip. Now go and do this for cash. It's a bad situation. And if you are looking at going into this, make sure you do your research on your dominatrix. Make sure they know what they're doing. Make sure they have years' experience. Read the referrals.
Yeah, definitely. And I've always said, like, if you're going into this to make money, you're not going to be successful.
It is actually really expensive to do this. So you've got to love it.
You've got to have such a passion for it.
You're investing in a lot of tools, but also a lot of training and self-development.
And energy. You're like, you have to know not only how to work with others people's energy, but you also have to be very aware of your own energy. And the connection of energy during a session is very powerful. You know, I talk about energy so much, like, in these things and, like, on my socials and things, because it is at the core of what we do. We're working with people's energies at the end of the day. And as a dominant, you're in such a fucking privileged position to guide that energy somewhere. And you can kind of guide it for good and you can kind of guide it for bad. And if you don't know what the fuck you're doing, you can do a lot of damage. And I think that's why also the intake session, the intake part of a scene, like the pre-scene, I spend easily probably, like, when I'm training, 2 2 training sessions on the pre-scene, and it's the bit that a lot of people are the most nervous about like that pre-scene chat. And because I have like a full intake, there's like and I have a book, and I actually recommend my trainees now, I said, to have a book, and before they get there I have everything written down. I fill in the bits that I kind of know, and then I go through everything with them. Like, one of the big ones for me is understanding someone's motivation to practice. Like, why the fuck are you here? How am I going to lead a session and lead this successfully if I don't understand your motivation to practice? And I don't think a lot of DOMs do that. No. I don't think they ask the questions. Like, it's not, I think they ask, like, what do you want to do? Like, activities. They might ask limits. They might go through some safe words. But are you actually understanding what this person is here for? What journey you have been, like, entrusted to lead? And even I said, occasionally you do get clients who will come in and say, oh, I don't know. But then you just have to ask them a few simple questions and you can figure it out. Yeah. You could ask them, what's your day-to-day life like? Or, I have a really busy job and I'm making a lot of decisions, so I write down stress relief. Yeah. They're here to check out. They're here as a meditative purposes. There's like understanding that is so crucial, and I think it's amazing how many people are missing that step. It's like, what is the point of this practice? And it doesn't even have to be in a professional setting. I think also when you're doing it with a play partner socially or in your relationship, I think giving purpose to your practice is so much more powerful than just like, let's go.
Yeah, no, I agree. Every point you have said is correct, but unfortunately it's just not happening. Yeah. And I feel like the professional space is a more dangerous space if it's not done correctly. Yeah. So saying that, I mean, I'm sure plenty of people have had accidents at home. But I do feel like when you're paying for a service, that it should be correctly given. Yeah. And you should have confidence knowing that your dominant that you're actually submitting to, you're submitting your body, you're submitting your mind, that they're going to treat that with respect, and they're going to know what they're doing.
Exactly.
And it's so important. And I feel that, I pick on Australia a lot, but I feel like we're so far behind in this because I even noticed America has big training schools for dominatrix. Sydney, Australia in general, I don't think there's anything like that out there. So women are really embracing, America, Europe, all of those countries are embracing this as a profession and treating it like that. So you wouldn't go into any other profession without proper training. So it should be the same in what you're doing as a dominatrix.
And I think, and speaking of the ones overseas, there's a lot of women doing it also just for their personal lives as well. And, these people aren't even out there to go into it professionally, but they're actually taking it seriously, taking the time. And I actually think it's something that is really, if you get into it, it actually really connects with women really well. As I said, we do a lot of self-work as women, and BDSM can be such a vehicle for growth and transformation. And that's certainly something, not just as a dominant, but, also the submissives. And the transformation that you can have by entering a BDSM partnership or a BDSM journey, I don't think people sometimes realize. I think they think, oh, it's just a sexual kink, or they're just trying to get off, or what it is, but it's so much more than that.
It's so funny that you brought this up, because today, as you know, I'm about to do my training to be a Pilates instructor, so with a reformer Pilates. And I was in Pilates today, and I'm just like, when you're putting a Pilates class together, it totally reminded me of how I put my sessions together. It's like, right, what equipment am I going to use, and what sequence am I going to do it in, and, what state of, I need to make sure the body's stretched and relaxed and all of those things. So it does basically have connections to all types of things that we're doing, but we're treating it just as a sexual kink, whereas to your point, therapy, it's the same
therapy.
thing. It's body therapy.
It's body therapy, yeah. And I think, we hold so much in our body. We hold trauma in our body. We hold tension in our body. And this is really one of the ways that we can unlock that and let it go and like turn it into something like positive. So yeah, I think it's really interesting, like that link between people actually understanding what you can get out of it, as rather than just like, oh, I'm just like, yeah, get my socks off, get my rocks off.
Absolutely.
So like bringing it back to like that power play and using it more from a healing perspective, like what have you witnessed with people, like, and the way that they can heal through that power play dynamic?
Well, honestly, I will reflect on my own healing first of all.
Yeah.
Because it was such a wonderful, releasing, powerful expression of sexuality when I, transitioned from my upbringing to who I am now. And if I didn't have my sexual exploration and my experience of being okay with asking for things and being okay to empower myself and own my own sexuality, that was such a healing thing for me to go through. The funny thing was, I knew I needed it. So after being married in a very vanilla relationship, I stepped away and I made myself a list and I went, what do I want to experience in life, like sexually?
Yeah.
I always knew I was a sexual person.
Yeah.
I was always someone who wanted to roll them over and get on top. And so for me, actually owning that was amazing and therapeutic. And I would never be able to speak confidently about sex because it was a bad word.
Yeah.
So now actually being proud and forward about this. But yes, I mean, I took it to a different level because I wanted to explore the full extent of my power and the full extent of owning my own sexuality. So, that had a lot of things on my list. I identify as being bisexual as well. Yeah. So that was definitely frowned upon in regards to, you get cut off, you get completely cut off by owning your sexuality with religion unless you do it their way. Yeah. So for me, coming out and owning all of those things is very, very empowering. So, and healing. I say empowering a lot because that's how I feel about it, but the process is actually the healing. Because you internalize a lot. Like I've done a lot of research on, the emotions that are stored in your body and how to release them, and even the way you sleep at night. And I have a very defensive sleep style because of how I was brought up. And so for me, even letting go of that, this has been a process and you're not healed overnight, but I 100% know that this has really, really helped me to release a lot of things in my personal space as well as in my workspace. So yeah, that healing, I'm the prime example. And being afraid to do it to start with too, because I got introduced to being dominant from a submissive. So yes, I was out there searching for my own sexuality and trying to identify what that was. So I started from scratch, have a one night stand. You've never done that before. So I had this list and I was going through all these steps. But when I got BDSM was on my list, right, of things to try, but I had no idea how I wanted to try that. And then I met a submissive male. And he was like, it was so funny because my first instance with him, when I took him, I say I took him, isn't that funny? But he actually took me back to his place. And I had boots on and a short skirt because that's what I always wear anyway when I go on dates. But I do that from my own style. I wear black a lot. I wear leather a lot. I wear boots. And So all of these were tick, tick, ticks in his eyes, right? But I had no clue that he was submissive. And then we walk in the door, and the first thing I say to him, because he's like, "Oh, do you want a drink?" I'm like, "No, I know what I want to do." And I grabbed him by his work collar because he was in a work shirt. Grabbed him by his work collar and I said, "Where's your bedroom?" And I led him up the stairs to a bedroom. So I'm like,
and his brain's just going ding, 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 ding.
Yeah,
ding,
yeah,
ding.
tick, 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 tick. Amazing. Like, made all his dreams come true. I didn't find out till about 6 weeks later. Yeah. In a conversation we were having, that he might have been submissive. Yeah. So, some really funny situation, but healing of that. I wouldn't have got to that point without going through the steps of healing and being able to own my sexuality and being able to do that with confidence. Yeah. So not suggesting that everyone that grows up in a cult needs to go through that healing. There are other ways.
We've all got our trauma. That's the thing is we've all got the trauma somewhere in our past that we need to work through as we get older and wiser.
Yes.
But
the sub that I had, right? He knew he was submissive from his teenage years, but had never practiced until he met me. Yeah. And so we kind of went on the journey together, which was very amazing. I think he still has a lot of healing to do. But that's more about status and lifestyle choices as opposed to sexuality. Yeah. But even watching him be comfortable with, the ropes the first time I put them on him and things like that, and watching the ease of like, "Oh, I've been wanting this for 17 years or whatever it was." I think sexually is a lot to do with release of trauma as well if we're hiding who we are. So I've definitely witnessed it firsthand, not just from myself, but also the subs that I've had.
Yeah. It's interesting, people still not being, out a lot with BDSM as much as like kink has become quite, it is in a little bit of pop culture now, I think. It's cool to be kinky, but most people won't go out in their everyday life and claim like, I practice BDSM or I'm a dominant or I'm a submissive, or it's still a little bit, quite a bit in the shadows. And I think that's maybe why we've got dominant so wrong. It's still seen as a dirty word. And I think that's what, at the end of the day, we really need to change. Like, dominance is not a dirty word. BDSM is not something that needs to be practiced in the shadow. We deal with power play on a daily basis in our lives. And this is just actually expressing it and using it in a very healthy manner, which is not always what's happening, especially, you look at workplaces and relationships, vanilla relationships. There's so many examples of power play not in a healthy state. But this is actually a space where generally, of course, there's going to be dark sides to everything, but generally it's a space where you can play with power in a very safe and consensual, healthy way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's, look, I'm wearing a face covering today. And the only reason that I'm doing that is because I'm not a professional. And because I have alternate work that I do outside of this professionally, it could still be associated with a bad thing if somebody sees me.
Exactly, because it's still not viewed in a positive light completely.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's horrible.
It's a sad reality about what it is.
No, and as I said, I would openly talk about what I do. I'm not ashamed of that at all. But if somebody I work with see it, you could still get fired because of them being worried that it's going to reflect poorly on the company you work for.
Yeah. Or being seen as someone who's psychologically not stable, which we know, like, based on research, it is the opposite. People who practice kink and BDSM are actually more likely to be psychologically stable.
Yeah, I agree.
But Anyway, we're out of time today, but I know we could talk a lot more. But thanks again, Alex, for coming for Dom Girl Chats, and I can't wait for next time.
I can't wait either.
Thanks, everyone, and as always, stay kinky.